We're going to have the same answer, I think.
Oh, yeah. So was that idea of the skills, content, and context, was that a new idea to you? Or is it something, have you heard things like that before?
We did data teams training last year, and I
Okay.
think that was part of our data teams training, was really breaking down standards so that we could work on specific parts or measure specific parts.
Yeah. How did this compare to the data team training? I had that a few years ago as well, and I don't recall it maybe as well as you do. Was it very similar, or was it? Did it have some newer or some different approaches as well?
I don't remember for sure.
Okay.
Sorry, that's not helpful. I feel like it was fairly similar. I don't remember if it was the same exact 3 pieces to it though.
Okay. And then I guess a follow-up question would be: is there anything in the module that was challenging, perhaps maybe it's going to take more time to grasp, or was there anything in there that you really felt ran counter to what you know as best practice?
As an ELL teacher, or what is now called EL, I guess, in the state of Minnesota, we have 4 kind of aspects of language that we are constantly trying to measure and see how students are doing with. And so it's not only the writing and the speaking, but also listening and reading. And so when one of the videos had talked about that the only measurable kind of outputs would be writing and speaking, I mean, on the one hand, it definitely makes sense because, how are you going to measure whether a student has been able to read something? It's probably they're going to share out by writing or speaking. But it kind of struck me, I don't know, it was interesting to me because as an ELL teacher, those are the domains that we measure, are not only the speaking and the writing, but then also the listening and the reading. And so I tried to kind of think about, well, how could I still make those things measurable, even if it's, they have to listen to a task and they have to somehow show they understood it? How can I make that measurable so that it could still fit as a skill?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And did you come to any kind of conclusions, or are you still in the process of thinking that through?
Some of the things we do for our placement tests and things, I think, really get at the skill of listening. For example, if we have a student listen to some directions and then, point to something. So they're still having to show their understanding in a different way. And it's not necessarily speaking or writing. So, pointing to something or somehow following directions, maybe with a movement. Sometimes they have to group objects. So I guess it maybe depends on the task, but I think there can be ways of kind of showing knowledge or showing understanding that don't always necessarily have to be speaking and writing, although those are certainly 2 of probably the most common.
Yeah. Yeah, I think my experience in some of these more formal data team trainings has been sometimes the rigidity of the only ways or things like that. So I can relate to that. Sarah, does that ring true with you as a science teacher, or?
I feel like the process that was described is really the process that we use. The co-teacher that I teach my course with, we really use that process as we're designing curriculum or as we're designing content for our class. And so I feel like that was pretty reflective of what it is that we're doing in our practice right now.
Okay, that's good. So I'm going to turn off the screen share briefly. And what we're going to do is go into the document, and I'm wondering if we would just like to kind of model what this task is supposed to be, and that's collaborative. If I thought we could just go in and find a standard, and maybe together through that document analyze it, break it into the context, skills, and then look at the different strands, and do that as a live collaborative effort, like we might do in a classroom, or maybe explore how this tool works too for that kind of a collaboration if you were working with other people in the district, or if you were even outside of the district on a statewide or national level. Does that sound like something you wouldn't mind tackling?
Sure, sounds good.
Who wants to claim the standard? Who wants to? Because I have both the science and the social, so any one of you can say, oh, I'm going to go in there and grab something that that fits me.
I'm fine either way.
Let's do your science ones.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
great.
So Sarah, if you could go into the document
Mhm.
and then just click on one of those links.
Yep.
And then when you find one, go ahead and just paste it into the room below the table there. Sarah's busily typing into the document here. So we have this wonderful state science standard here. And now, Sarah, is this something that you are teaching or will be teaching?
This is one that I taught at the beginning of this year. So I've already done this, but it's going to need some revision for next year.
Okay.
So the top part here, right where it says Minnesota State Science Standard, this is the actual standard given by the state, and it says that the students will understand that. So I should put that in here.
And Sarah, you said that on the science standards, the big standard is all understand.
Yes.
Okay.
And then in the benchmark, it says just the student will be able to. So.
Okay.
And here it would be explain is what would come next.
Okay. And then there's usually a number of benchmarks then for...
Yep, there's 4 or 5 benchmarks for this. So this is the second of benchmarks.
Okay. Well, I think it's exciting that we have Andrea and you both in the room, because really we could almost have a realistic kind of situation where if Andrea were working with you as an EL teacher at Park Center, you guys are sitting down. So I would say let's run it that way. The two of you need to teach this, and Sarah, perhaps you have quite a few EL learners, and in fact, I'm sure you do have quite a few EL learners in your room, and so you want to make sure that they can show mastery of this.
Yep.
I'll kind of step back and maybe just kind of ask questions, but I'll let the two of you go ahead and tear into this benchmark, like you did on your own benchmarks in your module.
Should we start by breaking it out into the skill and the content and the context?
I think that's a great idea.
Do we want to highlight it, or how do you?
However you would like is fine.
Yeah, let's highlight it.
Okay.
It's more fun that way.
It is. It's really fun.
Okay, so I put a place where we can make the key right below it.
Awesome. Okay, so for skill, should we do... I forget what it was in the other document. Do we want to keep it consistent?
Oh, I think for your colors, you guys can choose whichever one you want.
Okay, well, let's do green.
Great.
Do you want to choose the content?
Yep, got it. And you could do the context if you wanted.
Okay.
I'll do blue for this one.
Okay, I'll do like a yellow.
Perfect.
Great. Okay, so for the skill, looks like explain and calculate. Do you agree?
Yep, I agree.
Ooh, now I have to find the same green. See if that one was the right.
Right?
It's too many choices.
I think I'm
pretty close. Pretty close.
And then...
So the content...
Yep.
Sometimes it's almost easier to go straight to the context. Like here, in series and parallel circuits.
Yep, exactly.
Would you say that's the context?
Yep.
And then it's almost like everything else is the...
Yep, this middle
the
part
content,
here.
Right? Okay, so should we break it out then and...
Sounds great.
Write it separately. Do you want to do the calculate and I'll do the explain?
Yep, perfect.
Okay. Should we cut off the part student will be able to and just go straight with the verb?
Yep.
Okay.
Gotta get past you here. Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay.
I guess I'll just go above you here.
So we could almost break it out into two each, right? So like calculate could be like in series circuits and then in parallel circuits, and same with explain.
I agree.
Do you teach it separately, or how do you typically like to teach it?
I usually teach, I guess I can't think about it. Let me think about it.
No problem. Don't want me to put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, I do usually teach them separately, and then we compare them. So we look kind of at what the differences are between the two of them.
Oh, that's cool. Do you start with series or parallel?
Generally, we would do series first.
Okay, cool.
So Sarah, I'm going to guess that calculation would be kind of a specific certain kinds of strategies that they would apply, like formulas and things like that?
Yes, there would be formulas. There's formulas tied to each of these, and the formulas are different depending on whether it's a series circuit or a parallel circuit. You're correct.
Okay. And then the explaining, is that usually done in at about the same time as the calculating? Are they kind of tied together?
That's a great question. I had my students do the explaining part first and the calculating second.
Oh. So by explaining then, is it like they're kind of saying this is how I'm intending to find the answer, sort of thing? Or?
So I did the explaining part more through observations, where we would like build the circuits, and then we would look at how we were able to like see the brightness of the light bulbs in different circuits, and then we would look at simulations to see how the electricity or how the electrons were flowing through the circuits to be able to analyze what the current and the voltage and the resistance and the power were in those situations.
Okay. So we could almost add to the explain portion. I mean, I'm thinking now from like a language point of view, like through discussion of observations, kind of a way to guide that. Like if we were to give it to students to guide what they were going to do.
Yep.
Yeah, and so I noticed we're kind of frozen because like, is there a little bit of a reticence to add it to the actual standard? Is that because I like what you said, because that's the next question. Well, especially for your learners, Andrea, how are they going to do that? So if this were a document you were working on, looking at your standards, would you kind of add that into the standard in some way, like this is how the EL learners would do it?
Yep, and I might even put in specifically like a sentence starter, like using words like I notice, or this looks brighter because, or this is working better because. So I would kind of plug in, or even some of the vocabulary words like current, voltage, resistance, and power. Like I'd kind of give them ways to use it, and I'd even add that to the objective or the standard that I tell them we're using for the day.
What amazes me is, as a teacher, I would want to work with you. I wouldn't even care that I had EL learners in my room. I mean, because that's the kind of the scaffolding and things that I think I would appreciate having. So that just really is exciting to hear what you can bring to that kind of work.
So, Sarah, is your co-teacher, is the co-teacher you work with, is it an EL teacher?
No, it's not. It's another science physics teacher.
Oh, okay, gotcha. But I wondered when you said that.
Oh, yeah, no, it's not. It would be great. But one question I have is I did SciAp training several years ago, and when I did that, they were talking about doing content standards specifically and then language standards separately, and having those two things be separate. Do you
Mm-hmm.
feel like for your learners it's better to have them be combined or to have them be separate? Because
Sometimes I think it maybe depends on the lesson, but
mm-hmm,
sometimes I think it is nice to break it up into the content and the
mm-hmm,
language. So, like for the objective, right? So, especially if the content objective were calculate the relationship of current, voltage, resistance, and power in series circuits, maybe that's, we'd leave that as the content objective, and then we'd give them the how as
mm-hmm,
the language objective. So, saying something like, maybe, like you said, you have them explain it before they even calculate it using the
mm-hmm,
formulas. So maybe we'd say first, explain the relationship between current, voltage, resistance, and power in series circuits using words like, I notice, or they're connected by, or they're related because, and then maybe we'd have the calculate come second.
mm-hmm.
So sometimes I do think that they work together kind of in a way that makes sense to put them step
Combine them.
one and step two, list them separately. And other times it makes a lot of sense to combine them. Like if you're trying to have students justify something,
Mm-hmm.
like in an English language arts class or something, and you might just include as a part of the objective using this is true because, or something like that. So sometimes it kind of lends itself well to being combined, and other times it makes more sense to separate it.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, thank you.
sure.
So I'm looking at the standards. Um, would would this be something, Sarah, that you would feel, are you expected then to teach all four of those bullet points?
That's a great question. Um, I did not teach all four of these in my general physics class. I did the explain in my general physics class, and then they did the calculating in the upper level class. So they did the explain and calculate in the upper level class, and
Okay.
in my class they just did the explain. Um, so that's part of in my in in the state standards. Really, we're looking at the standards, but we're using the benchmarks to help determine what our objectives or our learning targets will be.
Okay.
So there was that standard up above it that I put in there, and so we use that to gauge, okay, what of the benchmarks or what part, when we break out the benchmarks into all these pieces, really lend itself to the larger standard or
Oh,
are
okay.
crucial for that larger standard.
All right. And so that's generally understood that once you break these things out, it's not like, okay, we have to make sure all four of these are being addressed completely for a student to show mastery in that standard.
I don't think, yeah, I think that the standards are more broad and that there's a lot of specific details that you can get into, but with a lot of state standards, there's not enough time to get into all of them. So we're really
Right.
looking at what ones most lend itself or are most crucial to understanding the bigger standard out of the benchmarks.
Okay.
And like in language arts and in math, the district has selected like power standards. Have they done
Mm-hmm.
that in
Mm-hmm.
science, Sarah?
Yes, yes. And so that would be like the bigger one would be our like our reporting standard. So the one that's up above would be our reporting standard or like our bigger standard, and we have 6 of those. And then there's like 5 to 8 benchmarks that go with each of them. And we just took this one benchmark and made 4 smaller standards out of it.
I'm just reading one of the comments here from Christina, and
Mm-hmm.
she says that by unpacking the standards, the classroom teacher really has to show understanding of content so well
Mm-hmm.
that he or she can break it down like Andrea and Sarah are doing in order to build it back up. Christina's curious. I'm wondering if they do this for all their standards, their priority standards, or just reporting standards. So for people listening in India, this is a very specific question to ASIO area schools where we have these things called priority standards or reporting standards. So who would like to answer that for Chris?
I can start. So I think it kind of I guess it depends on what our goal is with that particular lesson. Like if it's a crucial math lesson that builds into something else, I might work with, for example, the third grade teacher that I co-teach with, and we might break it down as far as what Sarah and I just did now, like to break it down into 4 separate kind of sub-standards, or I guess that sounds bad, but objectives. But if it's something that will be looped back and that we'll cover again, we may not break it down quite as much this time, with the idea that, okay, we'll come back and we'll do the second part of it the next time we cover it later in the year.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And in my class, we have done this with all of our priority standards, or our bigger standards, where we've built, which I think is going to be kind of the next module that we go through, we've built the learning progression. And so we've looked at all the state benchmarks, and we've pulled out, we've kind of done this process, maybe not so formally, but we've done this process and said, these are the parts that we need in order to build up to that bigger standard. So these are the things that we're going to emphasize in order to help the students create that knowledge.
You know, one thing that's come up in a lot of the module conversations as I've been following them is, and everyone, the 2 of you and everybody else has commented on the student role in standards and feedback and things like that. So let's assume that you have this standard kind of broken down. And I know in the next modules we're going to get into you know, what the next steps might be. But what is your sense of what do students need to know about what you just did, and how would you get them engaged with what we've just been engaged with? Because I know, and early in my practice, and I'm an older teacher, I mean, the students were never really let in on the secret of what they were supposed to be doing, which was a mistake. So and I'm guessing that you don't make that mistake. You're more intentional about letting students know what's going on.
So I'll start. In my classroom, for each of the units that we do 1 unit per the larger state standards. So in each of those units, I give the student the bigger state standard right away, and it's actually like posted in multiple places around my room, and they have copies of it. And then I break out the like sub-standards or objectives and give them those, and so that they can track kind of their learning as they go along, that they can see each of these smaller parts that are broken down, and that they can kind of follow the map of what we're doing in order to get to the larger idea. Does that answer your question?
Oh, sure. And the question really was a genuine question, because I know I was, in my practice, I was not as good as I wanted to be, and so it's interesting to hear how you share that out. So thank you.
In one of the classrooms that I co-teach in, we have the content and the language objectives posted, and the content objectives are derived from the power standards, essentially. And so then the teacher and I sat down this summer and kind of went through each one to decide what the language objective should be and kind of the learning progression, and then we posted them on the wall, and we refer to them pretty much every day, so the students know where they are, and they'll say, oh, on this standard, you know, I got a 3, I did really well, and I feel good about it, so now we're going to move on to the next one, right? So they know them, and they interact with them, and hopefully feel comfortable knowing where we're at and where we're going.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because both of you are the practice of posting them seems to be a standard practice, and that's good. Well, we are to the end of our allotted time, and I'm just amazed at the work that was done. And I think if other teachers could see this, this is actually not a difficult, arduous task, really. I mean, as Chris pointed out, I mean, obviously the 2 of you have great content knowledge of how to teach, and that is necessary for you to make it look so effortless. So it was really cool to see, and I love the discussion of Sarah, the question you brought up about the approach to, you know, bringing the language in with the content standard or separating it. And Andrea, of course, like every teacher knows, it depends is the answer.